what fascinates.
Appeals to you.
It's the mystery. What is it that lives in these children? What is the reason for refusing to live in this world? All right, you can tell there's aphasia, there's echolalia, there's autism. That doesn't mean anything. Because there is no scientific solution. And as long as there isn't, all we can do is create an atmosphere for the child we are working with that makes it possible to approach the child. It's a preparation to live in this world. I cannot give you a scientific answer. Many of the music therapy books open with, music is a non-threatening language. And I think it's one of the most dangerous statements. Music that is recorded is wrong for these children.
The psychiatrists are now saying music is a non-verbal, non-threatening language. And this is one reason why it can reach children, particularly autistic, psychotic children. And this, to them, is a very satisfying explanation of the power of music. For both of us, it goes much deeper than that.
I think there is a whole world of research that we need to explore, because I believe that the development of rhythm and keener perception of pitch and melody is an important basis for laying the foundation for language.
Obviously, we must start somewhere. As many children are nonverbal and remote, we usually pick up whatever natural expressions come from the child, put these into a musical improvisation, and return a musical portrait to the child. This is where the music child begins.
Peter said hello to me. Yes. Peter said hello. Hello.
Finish and then you can give me a kiss. Hello, Heather. Hello, darling. One more. Let's finish. By using different music, different harmonic patterns, to try to tell the child, I do understand you. That eliminates immediately our major 1, 4, 5, 7 chords, the 3 basic chords that are used in all nursery rhymes, in most popular songs for children. That includes the dissonances, the bitter chords, chords that make the child look up and become aware that somebody is trying to communicate, and you will get a response. Improvised music following the child into his inner emotions is the answer. So what is music? Any succession of single tones that a child produces becomes a melody. You connect the single tones and you interpret and return to the child a musical picture of himself. And within a very short time, you can establish a communication between therapist and child that is unique, because the child is not asked to perform, to repeat. It communicates at his level, on his terms, in his rhythm.
Yes? Shoe. Shoe. This one. This. Shoe.
Communication is approached differently for two basically different types of children. There's the limb child and there is the vocal child. The child who is a limb child will be a rhythmic, physical child, and you can almost see the energy rushing to his limbs. He either moves with his whole body or he needs a percussive instrument. He will not vocalize at first. The vocal child, however, will refuse an instrument. The energy instead will go to the respiratory rate, to the voice, to the breathing, or at a more disturbed level, to the screaming or the crying.
If his emotions are wild and disturbed and disordered, they become ordered in music, and he has an emotional experience to the piece of music you're giving him, bringing to him, and to which he is responding. Physically, he becomes involved in his drum beating or his instrument playing, whatever it might be. So the total child is involved, not just in a non-threatening, non-verbal language.
I like to think of it as a pre-verbal stage or a pre-music stage. Music therapy is not the right thing for all children in all stages of development. There is a stage that is definitely pre-music. So what I started doing is work with a part that is not educated yet.
Okay, go. What?
All education is forced on the child from the top of the head to the waist. So the child is continuously on the defense. He has used the feet for kicking, the legs for running, incessant running, movement, movement, but he wasn't aware of anything that was possible there. So what I started doing is greeting the child on the soles of the feet. And in every case thereafter, it was successful. And there was a sudden eye contact. There was another foot coming up to be greeted. And then you move up. If the child is young enough, you greet the knee, the hips, and you get to a point where you stretch out your hands and wait. And there comes a hand and joins yours. Now then you have reached the part that lost the fear of being educated. Now wait, now it's my turn. Fine. And especially in one case, with a child who was totally, in this case, nonverbal, with autistic tendencies. You know, the diagnosis read like a tic-tac-toe problem. There's psychotic, schizophrenic, autistic tendencies. Well, this child was young, 5 and a half. And when I came back to that child the second time, he was on the floor with one foot up and a music box playing, waiting to be taught. And you begin to prepare the child to be aware whether the verbal response is in the breathing or using a vowel sound or managing an approximation of a hello or bye-bye or I. Doesn't matter.
Here you have a child who doesn't speak. Perhaps he screams. You improvise music that suits this screaming child, maybe hyperactive music, or perhaps very apathetic but crying music. And the child begins to cry in the tonality of your music. This is the birth of the music child. Why should he do it?
Kathy, first session, September the 23rd, 1975.
He begins to wait for pauses. He gets to know the phrase structure and anticipates it. And out of his agitation or distress, he is crying and screaming, but something in him knows when the music is going to come to the end of a phrase. He anticipates it, and the scream is placed there. This is the music child. It's musical sensitivity.
And the element that will help to interpret the child is the harmonic element. You return a portrait of the child to the child that the child can accept. And the child, every child will respond to the musical portrait that includes the unspeakable inner life, torment, frustrations. And what are frustrations? It's what we call unacceptable behavior. We deal with this, we accept it, and we try to interpret it.
Musical improvisation is clinically designed and conscious at every moment to engage that child's communication potential. Switching to a whole tone scale, for example, renews and revitalizes this child's concentration and provokes a new response in her. Her voice hovers around the tonality of G, but the pattern of her vocalizations fall naturally within a quasi-Arabic scale. She imitates exactly 25 musical phrases, she anticipates cadences, she changes immediately with the change in dynamics, and she adds a rhythmic vitality of her own invention to the piece of music that we are creating together. For a child who tests at an 8th-month level, this is quite remarkable. For what it says is that there are listening skills of a much higher order that are operating here. What we are discovering is that music can be used as an adjunct diagnostic tool to uncover intelligence and sensitivities that traditional testing has not learned to measure yet.
music child functions regardless of handicap. This is why we separate this concept from handicap. Because the child who has a spastic arm, or the child who speaks with difficulty, the child who has epilepsy, the child who can't walk, whatever, this child can become a music child regardless of handicap. And the music child is nourished by the music you provide for the child. It becomes more and more skillful in its physical, motoric, musical activity, or in the use of his voice. And mastery comes. With mastery comes self-confidence. With self-confidence comes the ability to do still more. And this, then, is something that works from within on the child's personality, on the child's individuality, which is not handicapped. The real being that lives within the child isn't handicapped.
Oh, no, 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 no!
Stop.
Stop! No, no, no!
No.
Oh, yes!
You have to interpret the child's responses as he is able to express himself. In other words, if you take a record that is always the same, any child will learn to clap, beat, or march, if it is able to move, without any meaning or expression that can be developed into meaningful speech, into meaningful conversation, into a give and take.
You sing, "How are you?" Point to the drum and he goes, "Ta, ta, ta." It's his music child doing it. You haven't said, "Imitate me on the drum." You don't need to.
Obviously, there are great differences in the way music functions and is structured in therapy. Most retarded children will join in readily with musical improvisation. So the point there is to first diagnose a confused inner rhythm or whatever it might be, and then to remediate listening skills, cognitive disorganization, emotional instabilities, things of this sort. But for the autistic child or the emotionally disturbed child, it is making that initial point of contact. These children who are so remote can be contacted in the music, and therein lies a great difference. After only a few months of therapy, the 3 confused beating responses in Jimmy's profile were cleared up. In particular, a tendency towards a compulsive beat of 90 beats per minute. At this time, he has attained close to complete rhythmic freedom. These rich experiences of self as a child begins to uncover the creative, expressive forces at work within him give a new vitality to musical communication, which show up in comparative gains in his expressive language.
That was really nice. It was nice. Thank you.
Her speech, we always sit down there one night, and she came over with a word, and it really surprised all of us. She said it just as clear as you or I. She did very well. We're very proud of her.
Well, it pleases us too to hear this. You know, when they come and tell us, you know, we know then for sure it isn't just us getting used to her.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times it's a matter of learning her language,
Yeah.
not of her learning ours.
That's a really good program.
We've noticed a big change in the last 6 months.
Everybody is.
Yeah.
You know, people begin to
Yeah.
understand her that never dreamed that they could.
Someday I'll wish upon us and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, yes. Where trouble smells like lemon drops away beyond the chimney top. That's where you'll find me, yes. Wait, if happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why Yes, yes.